but we are going to try and watch the text box so that we know if people are saying anything. And this meeting is being recorded. I can just see the little sign coming on that the recording is starting now. So, myself and Kirsten Darling McQuiston.
Hello.
Yeah, here's Kirsten.
Oh,
Say
hello. Hello. Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, myself and Kirsten are each going to give a presentation of about 20 minutes. We think our presentations kind of speak to each other quite well.
Yeah.
We had a discussion about which one should go first because there are cross references between them. We've decided that mine will go first because it's more policy orientated, and Kirsten's will follow because it's more practice related. So, starting with this then. This is, I've called it Childhood Wellbeing in Scottish Schools, socialisation or subjectification, and I'll explain those terms shortly, but really that's how, by using socialisation and subjectification, that is how I'm going to link the talk to our key topic of social justice and diversity. Now this is a study of discourse in Scottish policy and practice, or in the practice community. It's a study of the way in which the language of wellbeing is used and how it's used, how it's built into or linked to other purposes of schooling, and how that in turn links into issues of social justice. Oh, our slide's not moving.
Try the arrow
At the bottom.
using the, yeah. Sometimes it worked last weekend.
Because it was working earlier. Ah, that's it. Phew, the slides are moving on. Okay, social justice and education. Draw your attention first of all perhaps to the picture on the right, which is a lino cut. Not many artists comment on social justice in education. It's called Not Just Numbers. So at the back of it, you've got masses and masses and masses of children going through the schooling system. And at the front, you've got the faces showing that they're all different, that we're actually dealing with diversity rather than numbers. So if we're going to talk about social justice and education, we really need to ask the question, what is it that we're trying to be fair about? What is the purpose of education? How do we make sure we're fair about it? And so I want to draw from what Biesta said about the purposes of education. And he talked about the composite purposes of education, one of which is qualification, as development of skills and knowledge, dispositions to allow children to do something, which we're all fairly familiar with. But he also talked about socialisation. And socialisation is about teaching individuals how to adopt the norms and the values and the ways of doing things. And that is about kind of teaching children to conform so that they fit in. It's about fitting in, conforming. To some extent, it is about sameness. Whereas alongside that, a purpose of education is also subjectification. And subjectification is providing the opportunities for unique qualities of individuals to, what Biesta says, come into presence. So it's recognising that individuals are different, and it's about inviting people to be the people that they are, and recognising and acknowledging and responding to the differences between people. So these two things, socialisation and subjectification, almost seem to be slightly opposite. And yet they're both functions of education. Of course we need to socialise children. Of course children need to walk on the pavement and not on the road. But at the same time, they need to have space to develop as individuals, and we need to value the difference between them. And Biesta says, if you socialise without subjectifying, then it is anti-educational. It's not educational to do that. And I would argue that you socialise without subjectification, then you're not addressing the issues of social justice and diversity. So I would bring that into those to kind of foreground the talk. Now I'm talking about how the discourses of well-being play into that agenda. And in Scotland, there's a very comprehensive well-being policy called Wellbeing Across Learning. And it's got two aspects to it. One of which is called Learning in Health and Wellbeing, which is learning about health and wellbeing, which has always been on the curriculum of health education. But also, in the Scottish context, we have what is called learning through health and well-being, and that's about well-being being much more diffuse, being something that teachers need to think about at all times as you're working with children and young people. And it's thought to be the responsibility of everybody who works with children and young people. And in a lot of ways, this is a very welcome policy that all teachers should address the well-being of children. But at the same time, what has happened is that the state has silently encroached upon areas which would have been thought to be family life, the care of the well-being of children. And it also legitimates state intervention in personal aspects of children's lives, and it's done it without any kind of discussion. There's just sort of shifted the boundaries between the home and the school as it does it. So we're going to, and I think that invites a little bit more exploration. Now, as it's a discourse study, of course, we have to have a few definitions of words at the start of it. And so to start with, we're talking about health and well-being. So we'll start with what we mean by health. But what is used very widely is the World Health Organization definition of health, and it's used in our policies as a state of complete physical, mental and social well-being, not just absence of illness. So that's quite straightforward. Health is a state of well-being, no problem. Until, of course, you start to ask the question, well, what is well-being? If health is well-being, what do we mean by well-being? And that's where you start to get into a little bit of difficulty, because well-being is invoked in all sorts of contexts: emotional literacy, resilience, self-esteem, social skills, citizenship, voice, social justice, creativity, achieving, but you name it, it seems to be something to do with well-being. And the writers Errata Whiting did an analysis of the way in which the word well-being was used in English policy. And they concluded that the word well-being is used like a great big arrow that points and says, good things this way. So anything good, you call it well-being. Or if you want something to be seen as good, you call it well-being. And one thing about this word well-being is that it is always seen as positive. You can't argue with well-being. You can't say, I'm opposed to the well-being of children. You just cannot say that. And so it denotes a sort of good feeling to anything that's attached to. So it's got very malleable meaning across interagency boundaries. What a doctor says means by well-being might be different from a social worker, which might be different from a teacher, and so on and so forth. And so it's a floating signifier. What I signify when I talk about well-being might not be the same as what you signify when you talk about well-being. So we don't really know what it is, but in terms of Scottish policy, we do know that it is everybody's responsibility, whatever it might be. And so I identified different discourses of well-being within education, literature and policy. And this is something that I've done through my work and adapted it from Errata Whiting. And the discourses that you see have their roots in different academic and professional traditions. So you can see discourses of physical health promotion, many around lifestyle choices. You can see psychological discourses around kind of how children feel, social and emotional literacy, understanding and managing their emotions, understanding and managing their social behaviour. You can see discourses of care, which are discourses to do with really adult responsibilities towards children. How do we look after children? How do we provide for their well-being? But interestingly, there's a discourse of flourishing, which emerges from philosophy and is related to Aristotle's notion of eudaimonia, or leading a life you have reason to value. And that's, in modern parlance, we would refer to that as flourishing. And that's very different, particularly from the psychological discourse of emotional literacy. It's not looking inwardly about how you feel, it's looking outwardly to how you live. And arguably, the discourse of flourishing is the most educational of these discourses. This links most closely to what we think education is about, preparing children and young people to be able to lead a good life. And this is also not so individualised. The idea of eudaimonia is linked to your life within the community, your contribution, and your life with other people. And then finally, there's an emerging discourse of sustainability, which is fairly quiet at the moment in Scottish policy, but is very much louder outside of education policy. The wellbeing and discourse are very much linked, wellbeing and sustainability. There we go. So in this study that I'm talking about, I did a critical discourse analysis, and I looked at the different discourses of wellbeing used in Scottish education policy, and I examined how they were used in relation to the other purposes of schooling. You know, what is wellbeing for in a schooling context? And the data comes from Scottish Health and Wellbeing Policies, Curriculum for Excellence, and the interagency policy that we call GERPEC. And it also comes from some interviews from policy actors and teachers. So I'm just going to explore how we talk about wellbeing in Scotland and what we think it is for. So, in the health and wellbeing policy, this is really how childhood wellbeing is defined, if you like. This is experience and outcomes. This is, I can expect my learning environment to support me to do the following things. And if you follow the list down, you can see it's very, very individualised. It's got self-awareness, self-worth, respect for others, personal achievement, resilience and confidence. So very individualised, very strong sense of psychological well-being, emotional and social literacy. A little bit in it about promoting a healthy lifestyle. A little bit about assessing and managing risk. So again, it's individualising issues of health. A little bit about care, in that you know which adults to look for, to listen to, but very much about sort of operationalised list of, if I can do these things, then I will have well-being. Until you get to the very last one on the list, when it suddenly says acknowledge diversity and understand it's everyone's responsibility to challenge discrimination. And it's almost as if somebody different walked into the room at that point and said, hang on a minute. But mostly it's very, very individualised. So that's what we want children to look like, have a set of skills. This statement here about what has it got to do with the rest of schooling, what is health and wellbeing for? This statement, good health and wellbeing is central to effective learning, comes up again and again and again in our policy. Health and wellbeing is for learning. It is serving another purpose, and the purpose that it is serving is the sorts of learning that schools want the children to do. And then if you follow that quote on, we get a discourse of care, when young people feel included, respected, safe and secure. And then at the end, they are more likely to develop self-confidence, resilience, positive views. So again, we get to this very individualised view of the skills we want children to have. And interestingly, the little thing that it says about education, it talks about achievements and contributions being valued and celebrated. Nothing about education per se, and the sense of flourishing that you might get through learning, that is kind of absent from the policies. In Scotland, we have the Scottish curriculum aims for 4 capacities. And running around the outside of this wheel, the well-being wheel of Scotland, you've got successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens, and effective contributors. And that is the government view of what they would like children to be. That's the, if you like, character development in Scottish policy. And it's interesting that that sits around the wellbeing wheel. Along the spokes of the wheel, we've got a discourse of care. We've got nurtured, active, included, safe, so forth. We've got 8 indicators. But the purpose of those 8 indicators are to achieve successful learners, confident individuals, responsible citizens and effective contributors. So what it is to learn in Scottish schools is partly to learn what sort of person to be. And again, the health and wellbeing agenda is to support the children in learning to be those sorts of people. So again, it is health and wellbeing for something else. And just in case we were in doubt about what the 4 capacities are for, They appear in the government's economic strategy. So I don't think the 4 capacities are only for economic benefit, but they certainly partially are. And it says the 4 capacities at the core of Curriculum for Excellence will enable our young people to develop the attributes, the knowledge and the skills that they will need in the modern workforce. So we've got a very clear link between health and wellbeing policy for the purposes of schooling, for the 4 capacities, and that being for the workforce. So arguably, health and wellbeing is being, the discourse of health and wellbeing is serving some of the broader government agendas. So overall, the policy messages, I would say that the discourses of other professional groups, psychology, health, and social care have migrated into education, and they've overshadowed any discussions about the contribution of education to well-being. There's nothing in there about how important learning per se is to education. The process, the content of what you learn, process of learning, how that contributes to flourishing is completely absent from the documents. And so the Curriculum for Excellence policy documents invite an interpretation of discourses that socialise children towards compliance with school goals and desirable character attributes. Going back to Biesta, I think this is very largely about socialisation rather than subjectification. And there's very little evidence in the policy, in the written policy, of a discourse of human flourishing through education. However, I want to talk just quickly about what the teachers said when I started talking to them about the health and wellbeing policy. Now, quite a lot of the data actually reinforced what we just said, reinforced what was in the policy discourses. Wellbeing was about being in a place to learn, and wellbeing was a solution to other problems. So if things go wrong, then you just work on children's well-being until things get better. And it was a way of kind of moving problems that might have been caused by something else, like family, community, poverty, to children, and trying to work on children to solve these bigger problems. But I don't want to dwell on that. I want to go on and talk about how some teachers really saw teaching and learning as being the main thing that they brought to well-being. So here's a teacher saying, well, what I like to do is I like to ask children, and I like to say to them, what sort of things are you interested in? And I explain to them it's pointless planning topic of work if you've done it already and you're not interested. It's your learning that will be affected. So here's a teacher. Now, that's not very unusual that a teacher might do that in Scotland, but the important thing is that she sees that that is what she contributes to well-being, that making sure that the work is really interesting, that the school children think it's really valuable. So that comes back to leading a life you have reason to value. And some teachers talked about the curriculum. It's an English teacher saying the themes that we deal with, life and death and love and friendship, all of the things that are in literature, you know, that as an English teacher, I can contribute the study of literature to well-being. And we've got a history teacher, a policy actor who was a history teacher, saying, you know, how can you look at World War II without looking at persecution and human relationships and man seeing humanity to man? So again, it's what we study. The things that are actually on the curriculum are about well-being. And these teachers were really thinking about what they taught and the value of that to childhood flourishing. So this is well-being in the philosophical sense of leading a valuable life. And then finally, in terms of quotes, here's somebody saying, well, why do we do this? It's not just to give the kids a good time. There's an intention, and the intention is improving their knowledge of themselves and what's out there for them. So that is subjectification. And somebody at the bottom, I think well-being is people being in a position where they feel they have larger control over what happens to them. So the teacher discourses very much did chime, or some of them very much did chime, with the idea of education for flourishing, education for subjectification, as against the policy. So in conclusion, I'd say that the policy has been populated with discourses of emotional literacy and health promotion at the expense of education discourses. Responsibilisation of the individual has happened rather than preparing the ground for human flourishing. And so there's overemphasis in policy on socialisation. However, I think the interviews with the teachers give us a very strong sense that there is a space in curricula for excellence to consider the role of education in subjectification, in paying attention to children's difference and diversity of children, childhood flourishing, through the idea of leading a life that I have reason to value. That's what I would like to say about that.
Thank you, Jenny.
Okay, so I'll leave that open to questions. I know it's slightly difficult to do the questions through the text block, the typing. But if anybody would like to put any questions up, we're on quite a short schedule, so we would like to have a bit of a discussion if we can. So Natalia's typing now. Natalia, I didn't see you coming in, Natalia. So hello and welcome. Oh, a long question.
Should we? Has anyone got any questions?
Has anyone got any questions
from the live audience?
Or comments?
Really interesting.
Yeah.
How, like, if, for example, if you look at a practice that's embedded in a culture, let's say, and it's considered okay in a particular society, and if you say that it's considered okay in that particular culture, but how do you think those who want to change it can start the change? Because even if they want to, like for example, let me give you an example. I came across this study. It was conducted in Pakistan, and in that a teacher who decided that from now on I will not use the traditional way of lecture in which students just sit. I will involve group participation, and I will give them the opportunity to have a say, and they can express their interests and everything. And the students themselves didn't like it. So, and she continued the practice for 1 month. After 1 month, the students boycotted the class.
Well, I mean that's interesting, I think. And I think whenever you bring anything new to children, because sometimes we think, oh, good, we're going to do peer assessment, and oh, good, we're going to do these modern things. That there is an element of explaining why you're doing it, and there is an element. I mean, I don't know about that particular case, of course. I don't know what happened, but I do know that when teachers suddenly bounce in doing something different, it isn't automatically received as great, because people do get very used to certain ways of doing things, certain ways of looking at it. So I think part of it has got to be explaining why you're doing it, and sometimes taking it step by step and showing what the value is of doing things differently. Because, I mean, if we go back to the quotes that the teacher I had who was doing things pedagogically different, she'd had to build that up with her students over a long period of time. So I think that's very true. Yeah.
Tuya's made a comment here as well.
I think this is a global phenomenon. Yes. Yeah, I think it is, and I think it comes. I think it comes up in all sorts of areas. I think we're kind of familiar with a lot of this neoliberal discourse around lots of things, and it appearing and teachers not necessarily agreeing with. I think as teachers we're very familiar with the gap between what we'd like to do as educators and what the government asks us to do, and how that can be quite different. But I think it's quite interesting that if you actually dig into something that seems so nice as the wellbeing policy, that actually it's sitting there, so and that actually that the really lovely, nice, soft discourses can be appropriated, and they can be used for other purposes. So we kind of have to look behind what things are. I think there was a minister of education in the UK who said we must always use words that people like. And I think well-being is a really good example of that. If you use the word well-being, people are going to like what you say. So you can disguise rather harsher agendas in soft language, and I think, but I think it's very heartening to find that when you speak to the teachers, they haven't all fallen for it. Yes. So we've got a hello from Natalia. Yes, hello from Nafu in Russia. Yes. So we've now got 2 Russian universities. Hi, Natalia. Lovely to see you.
Oh, and Frank has said, there are places of well-being concept.
I wonder about the challenges for teacher education. Yeah, well, I think that's right. I think it is a localised concept because if we take that philosophical notion of leading a life you have reason to value, it is the life that you personally consider to be of value. So the life that I might consider to be of value to me here in Scotland, and it would be very much conditioned by cultural understandings and who I live and who I live with and what I'm familiar with and so on and so forth. But I think to some extent I think the challenges for teacher education are actually similar to the challenges for education more generally, in terms of it being how we try to understand and respond to diversity in ways that don't make assumptions about people. So I think it's yes, and yes, Suvi said, but the system of education is always a problem to be open to fostering the flowers to flourish. It's about different values and different cultures, very much. And I suppose what I'm arguing against is the idea that well-being is simply a set of skills. Although I actually have got a last slide, which I didn't put up, which you might want to think about, because I'm not arguing that we shouldn't support children's psychological well-being. I'm not arguing that we shouldn't be interested in their resilience or their self-esteem or anything like that. But I'm saying if all we're doing is channeling those things into, developing the perfect neoliberal citizen, then we're not quite getting it right. So I think that you probably do enhance children's freedoms in education through some of those skills. But we then want to think about how you enhance their freedoms through education, and what we actually do once children are in a good place to be able to engage with what's going on at school. What is it that we do at school that enhances their flourishing and helps them to understand themselves within the context of the wider society, and to recognise and pursue those things which they value. So a lot of it is about helping children to understand what they value, to have the knowledge and the skills and the capacities and the critical thinking to know what it is that they want to pursue. I think that's what education helps children to do. It helps them to good education does. I think we've had enough of me. I think thank you very much for your contributions. I think we should move over to you, shall we? We'll move over to Kirsten.
Then we just need to swap over the slide. So we do the stop sharing.
Stop sharing.
Yeah.
Okay. And
share my
screen.
Share my document. And then it should be the second one on the list.
Presentation one.
There we go.
Okay.
Okay. Is there another? Mouse gone. Go. Okay, so hello all. Thank you very much for all coming to listen from all over, which is very, very exciting. For anyone that missed the introduction, my name's Kirsten, and I'm going to talk to you today about how I explored participatory approaches to learning and teaching, and what I'm going to share with you emerged from part of my PhD, and I hope that I have something valuable to offer to the network. Just to give a sense of context, at the time of undertaking my PhD, I was working with a primary 1-2 class. So So the children are aged between 5 and 7 years old in a middle-sized school in the northeast of Scotland. And I'm going to begin this presentation by giving an insight into the political context, building on what Jenny's been presenting today. And in Scotland, that really forefronts social justice and therefore approaches linked to social justice, including participatory approaches. I'm going to then provide a critique of some of the approaches and then show you how sort of the journey I took as part of my PhD, how I explored participation at a theoretical level and then at a practical level. I've just noticed there's two.
The screen is black. Should there be something else?
Oh, maybe
Oh, Gregor can see Kirsten's slides.
I can see Kirsten's slide. Oh.
And Archie can see the first slide, which is...
Okay, that's fine.
Tui says, okay, if it's only me, no problems.
Oh, sorry. I don't think there's any other buttons we have to press, are there?
No, we're on to screen sharing.
Okay, shall we just hope?
We'll hope.
I'll try reloading.
Try leading. Oh, that's
okay.
Tui.
Okay.
That's Tui.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. I'll just carry on for now. Is that
yeah? Yeah. Just carry on.
Okay. Yeah. So, in Scotland, so building on Jenny's insight. So at the time of undertaking my research, curricular reform in Scotland in the form of Curriculum for Excellence was in its infancy. Gary Dawn states that since decision-making in education has been devolved to Scotland from the British government, the decisions made around this education have been done so within Scotland's values of social justice, equality of opportunity and equity in provision. So there we have, these values are evident in the documentation that surrounds Curriculum for Excellence. And here again, we have the 4 aims, which Jenny spoke about. So in particular, all learners are encouraged to be responsible citizens and actively encouraged to participate in all aspects of their life. Social justice also permeates at a level for teachers to reflect on their practice. Our General Teaching Council for Scotland have developed a set of principles which teachers have to achieve and continue to develop in their careers, which includes embodying social justice as a core value. So in Scotland, at a political level, social justice is really coming through. And as a result, children's participation in their learning as a way of demonstrating a commitment to social justice has become an area of interest. Okay. The nature of children's participation in their learning is, however, questioned and critiqued by some. I'm going to talk about Michael Fielding and Roger Hart, who both offer their critiques, saying that children's participation in their learning is often done in a very tokenistic and sometimes manipulative way. Often individual children are consulted about relatively materialistic things in schools, such as what colour should we paint the wall, or what playground toys will we have out today. So it's not being achieved in a very transformative or emancipatory way that actually does begin to grapple with issues of social justice in Scotland. Michael Fielding explains that historically located structures of power still limit the extent to which children can participate in their learning. He critiques methods used to enhance children's participation, including approaches such as pupil voice. It's often been focused towards data rather than mutually respectful dialogue with learners and teachers. He states that this is due to the broader political context, which really drives an accountability agenda, which focuses towards data. So here we've got a bit of a tension between a political need for social justice, but also accountability. So while Fielding discusses children's participation on a continuum from data to dialogue, Roger Hart has presented this ladder of participation, which shows levels of non-participation at the bottom and levels of participation up at the top. And they range from manipulation at the bottom to child-initiated shared activities or decisions with adults. Now, I find this particularly interesting because some would say that children's their self-directed and initiated activities should be at the top of the ladder, but Hart argues that actually it's the children and adults working and learning together that creates the best levels of participation. And for me, this really engaged with the reading I've been doing, especially the works of John Dewey, who talk about the teacher's role in children's learning and saying that they shouldn't be external but part of the moving spirit of the group. So for both Fielding and Hart, the key to participation lies with the learners with teachers, children with adults participating together. So as a teacher, my challenge was to explore this withness. How do I achieve this with the children in my class? So to do so, the mouse disappeared again. Sorry.
My mouse is terrible.
I know, so. Yeah, let's try it on there. Oh, that's good. Is that okay? So yes, I needed to explore kind of a deeper theoretical, epistemological level in order to kind of explore how I was going to be with the children and really bring about some sort of level of change. So I looked to complexity theory and the insights it could offer. Now, I don't have time in this presentation to give a full explanation of complexity theory, and I don't have the expertise either. But what I want to do is just highlight the ways in which complexity theory enabled me to move forward with my thinking and inevitably my practice. So firstly, complexity theory understands that our activity is embedded within both human and non-human systems. And that's illustrated here in a series of concentric circles. So kind of engaging with the discussion earlier, thinking about this social, cultural, physical, biophysical systems in which our activity is embedded. And secondly, complexity theory acknowledges the interactive nature of activity both within and between these systems. So it's creating a two-way dialogue within these layers, and that's what supports ongoing emergence and change within complex systems such as classrooms. And this kind of ongoing emergence and change occurs because of the ability of a social group to create knowledge at both an individual and a collective level. And it's this sort of relational and contextual view of knowledge as something that can be created through shared activity and participation that offers an alternative to models of learning that are based on the transmission of often abstract knowledge from a teacher to individual children. And what complexity theory does then is, because the knowledge is no longer located with the teacher, it kind of offers a flattening out of relationships between teachers, learners, and knowledge, which was very helpful for me. This flattening out is elaborated on by Greg Mannion, who helpfully uses the term spatially and relationally sensitive to support a reframing of adult and child relationships that really does empower children, and I would say teachers too. So that he uses the term adulting and childing to describe the relational roles and being, that states that adults and children are not separate but operate along a continuum. So from this perspective, a child can adult and an adult can child. And this was something I certainly began to experience with my class as we actually engaged with the practical elements of the research. So moving now, still at a fairly theoretical level, but this was my sort of bridging process from complexity theory to the classroom. And I needed to think of how I was going to give the children in the class an opportunity to create meaningful knowledge that would move beyond the sort of abstract transmission of knowledge from teachers to individual learners. So like I said, I needed to bridge this theory to practice, and I did so by looking at embodied cognition. George Lakoff and Mark Johnson explain that the unique construction of our bodies, our physical, neurological, biological, emotional systems impact on how we perceive and experience and categorize the world. Okay, and this shift in thinking acknowledges the fundamental role of our body in cognition. And in doing so, it really challenges many of the practice that we come to know and understand within the context of schooling. We often demand children to think without their bodies. Michael Anderson employs the term practical activity to explain how we can use our bodies in a process of cognition to adapt our world, creating a two-way relationship between self and world that's really engaging with the relational insights of complexity theory. So for me, embodied cognition really helped me to shift my thinking from learning about a pre-given world as an outsider to learning as part of a world, a part of an evolving world. And while complexity theory offered a flattening out between the learner-teacher relationship, embodied cognition flattens out hierarchies between the body, the brain, and the world. And this really helped me to think how, in a practical terms, I was going to go about changing my practice. But before I go on to describe that, I just want to acknowledge the image that I've used on this slide. It's a drawing that was created as part of the research I carried out with the children in my class, preempting one of the methods that I used. And I selected this drawing in particular. I have permission to use these drawings and the few other ones in the preceding slides as well. But I selected this drawing because, for me, the open hand really says something about this child's being in the world and wanting to go out and interact with the world. And knowing the child that had drawn that was quite a big shift in their way of thinking. So along with drawing, as I've already given away, I also embrace walking as a way to interact with the children in our world. And of course, I'd walked with the children in my class before, usually as a way to get to somewhere or as part of a health initiative. But I'd always looked beyond the physical act of walking itself. So in terms of our teacher-learner relationship, walking together supported the emergence of participatory relationships just through the very nature of walking side by side. It really changes the dynamics. Joe Lee and Tim Ingold developed this feeling further, suggesting that a sense of embodiment is achieved by the shared participation in the ebb and flow of everyday life. And in terms of the body-mind-world relationship, walking in a place through time begins to appreciate the sensory embodiment of a person or a group of people who themselves affect and are affected by the places and spaces we inhabit. Identities are formed and understandings can be created. One cannot be separated from the other. Edward Casey refers to this inseparable relationship as constitutive co-ingredients, a bit of a mouthful. And it's in the crux of this inseparable relationship that knowledge and meanings can be created and understood. John Anderson, through a walking method called talking whilst walking, found that by bringing together self and place, he found that participants were creating knowledges which he'd never yet come across before in his relationship with them previously. And I have to say that during my research with the children, I was really overwhelmed by the knowledge that the children created as a result of their embodied interactions within our local environment. And I reflected on the way that walking really liberated me from my kind of habitual way of being with them in the classroom, when I was so focused on ensuring that they knew what they were supposed to know in terms of curricular outcomes for their age and stage. I came to understand how restrictive my role had been in my relationship with them, and the limited levels of participation and the spaces for diversity that I engendered in the classroom. And this was a very important sort of reflection for my ongoing development. So as you probably could have guessed, the other method that I used was walking, and again, drawing. And drawing is something else that we find in primary school classrooms all of the time. And there's lots of different types of drawing, and drawing can be used in different ways, from functional, technical, graphic. But Angela Anning did a very interesting study, and she found that within schools, drawings are usually used at a representational level, and representational drawings which match sort of dominant forms of understanding are usually, found to be better drawings. So within the context of my research with the children, drawing was not used as a fixed representation of the children's understanding of the world, but a way to engage with their experiences in a holistic way, as my reflection on the slides suggests. I'll just leave a moment for you to read that. So this using drawing was a way of kind of bringing the self in, and it was a really important part of the transformative process as a whole, supporting both our participatory relationships and the ongoing knowledge creation process. These two particular drawings were drawn by the girls were 5, both of them, and they were drawing towards the end of our research together, and they really, for me, provide an insight into their different way of their different way that they perceive the world from how I perceive the world. So to finish, I'm going to read a short episode from one of the walks I went on with the children. At this point of the research process, I was really struggling with my role, and I think that engages with what you were saying earlier. It was not something that just change happened immediately. It was a real struggle. I was actually too focused on the traffic to be listening to the children, and actually that's a really good thing, because otherwise I would have ruined it. This episode captures 3 children who had named or used their K, S and M. I think K and M were 5 at the time and S was 6. And they were having really quite a heated discussion about one of the local statues we encountered in our walks. It's a statue of a dog, as will become clear. And I hope, as I read it out, and I try my best to kind of not misrepresent the children, that it gives a sense of the opportunities that can be harnessed when children with diverse views and experiences of the world are allowed to bring themselves into the learning, maybe touching a little bit on this, the essence of subjectification that Jenny was talking about. Opportunities for them to create and negotiate meanings as active participants in their world, who are given the opportunity to be, and perhaps, maybe even flourish. So, Mrs. Darling, is that a real dog? Yeah, that was a real dog. The dog wasn't real. Oh, there's a car coming that way. It's a busy road. It died. Yeah, it did die. So they put it into metal. What a shame. That was a real dog. It died. No, it wasn't real. But it died because the dog wasn't real. Yeah, what? No, it wasn't. Eh? Thank you. There we go. So if anyone has any questions or comments, live audience as well.
Was it a real dog? No, it's a statue.
It was a statue, but he was a dog, and he was situated. There was a statue of him because it was from World War II. This dog had been quite heroic, so we managed to open this up a conversational space that allowed the children to engage with sort of the historical significance and the political and the geographical. So it enabled them to really engage at such a young age with quite complex,
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes, indeed.
Yeah.
That was really interesting. Can I check when you're using the drawing? Did you give them specific themes or?
So the drawings, it was a shame to don't have time to really contextualise it within the 20 minutes, but basically within our participatory action research together, we went on walks, and then we'd come back from the walks, and whatever emerged from the walks, we'd reflect on, and I'd invite the children, if they wanted to draw, and the drawing became really part of a meaning-making process. By the end, the children would say things. If we'd ask them a question, they'd say, "I need to draw it first." So they were in no way a sort of fixed representation of something, but really part of the ongoing process. And then what we would do is we'd always collate all the drawings together, and the children would analyse them with me. So they got really good at that, grouping the ones that they saw that had similarities or differences. And quite often they might change their mind of what their drawing meant, and that was fine as well, because there was space for that. So it was quite a dynamic process.
So you got a question there from Tuya. She says, "Thank you, that was really interesting," which I would agree with. "What did you learn as a teacher from your study?" she said.
So much. I really learned a lot. I learned a lot about kind of the different factors that shaped my role, and through my research, it was quite nice because it gave me a space to think about my values as a teacher and what I believed and how they sat within the political context and the curriculum. And it sometimes was a really frustrating space. Sometimes, it made me feel really bad about me as a teacher, and sometimes I had these quite horrific ruptures of my teacher identity and professional identity. I think I learned lots of things at lots of levels, but probably primarily it's that how important it is to engage with teachers' experiences, their normal day-to-day lived experiences, and that really, touches on what Jenny's presentation, that often we work within all these policy discourses, but within that there can still be a space for yourself and to kind of maintain your values and what you believe in.
Good. Okay. Anyone else like to ask any questions?
Can I just ask, this is maybe a hard one, and I don't mean to put you on the spot.
That's okay, Lorna.
But when you're talking about the walking side by side, I could understand it as a parent, and that a walk is the journey and the exploration. But I'm with you on the traffic element in terms of if you've got 20, 30 people in a class, how do you have that
practicalities of that?
Practicalities of that, and I don't know if did you learn anything that you could pass on to us as teachers, that it doesn't need to be a one-to-one, there can be a communal experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, definitely. So, and that's part of my research as well. I talk about the first walk I went on. I was obsessed with the health and safety, and I came up with a silly code word that meant stop, and it just felt nicer than saying stop somehow. But as it went on, and we kind of built up our own. It was quite, because I had children with real, some 5-year-olds, and some of them would be seen as not having great behaviour within sort of the classroom context. So I was really nervous about them to begin with, and they were always beside me. But as it kind of emerged and developed, and I realised that I gave more and more responsibility to the children, and they really responded. It was amazing. So I had 18 children in the class at the time, which was a relatively small class size, but for primary 1, 2, and I always had the early intervention assistant came with us, so there was 2 of us. The only difficulty was that you couldn't be side by side with all of the children, and I also reflected on that. But the really nice thing was I developed a really good relationship with this little boy who I hadn't probably had a great relationship up until then. And by the end, I was happy with him to walk anywhere, and we built up a really much more trusting. And he actually was one of the ones that took such a driving role in the whole research process. So it was, I felt really happy about that for him.
Very good. That is excellent. So we're kind of coming to the close, unless anybody else wants to ask anything. I wondered to you if you wanted to say anything at all about the seminars or about the network, if there's a moment for giving messages to people other than the content of our presentations. Is there anything you would like to say?
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny and Kirsten. That was very interesting and I think that's very thought-provoking, really, for all of us. And I think that we can share these things in our societies, even though they are different. What I would like to say is thank you to everybody, and especially you today, the presenters, and have a nice and lovely warm summer wherever you are. And the next people who will do the seminar, I think that it's our colleagues. Is that right, Natalia? If you can write the chat box. I think that you volunteered to be the next ones in September.
Good.
Great.
Yeah.
Good. Okay. Well, I think it just remains, does it not, to wish everybody a lovely summer. May the sun come out wherever you are. Yes, and there's a message there from Gregor saying how this is a debate in pedagogy. Excellent. Well, it's great to find all these connections, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes. So everybody,
Okay.
have a lovely summer.
Okay. Lovely. Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye bye, everybody.
Bye.